Welcome to another edition of Code M Radio. I'm Daryl Scott. For the next 60 minutes, Code M Radio will address topics that affects the lives of people around the world. Code M Radio is just one part of Code Media Group, LLC, which also publishes Code M Magazine. The mission of Code M Magazine is to create a trusting community among men that will inspire, educate, and act as a credible resource throughout the journey to manhood. You can visit our website, codemmagazine.com, for more information. If you wish to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, it's CodeMagIntl. That's CodeMagIntl. I'm joined by the Reverend Dr. Leah Lewis. Leah, good day.
Hey, Daryl, how are you?
I am just happy that I got to wake up again and have another great day.
Right, in the midst of this hot season and this hot political season.
Yes. Our guest today, can you give us some facts about Judith Singleton?
Yes, Dr. Judith Singleton is an Adjunct Assistant Professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Northwestern University. Dr. Singleton serves as producer of the film The Light of Truth, a monument for Ida B. Wells, which she views as the culmination of her life's interests and experiences in the arts, social sciences, and sciences, combining filmmaking, television production, and anthropology, as well as public health, and issues concerning human rights, women, race, and class. Dr. Judith Singleton, welcome to Code M Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. You have got to tell us, how did you get involved with the making of this film titled The Light of Truth, a monument for Ida B. Wells?
Yes. Well, our director, Rana Siegel, I have known for years. Rana and I, we have a mutual friend, Margot McMahon, who is an artist and sculptor. And Margot's work is all over the city of Chicago, but she was commissioned to sculpture a bust in honor of Gwendolyn Brooks. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Gwendolyn Brooks was a poet and teacher, and she was the first African-American to win the Pulitzer Prize, which was in 1950. And so with sculpturing this public work of art, Rana also made a documentary film. It's called The Oracle of Bronzeville. But the thing is, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine invited me to a fundraising event, raising money for the monument for Ida B. Wells. And so we went, and it was great. The keynote address was given by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is a New York Times journalist who heads the 1619 Project with the New York Times. And apparently a video was made of this event. And Rana got a hold of this video, and apparently I'm in the video. And she says she's watching the video, and she said, "There's Judy." And so she contacted me to ask me if I would be interested in serving as producer of the film. I was quite honored that she asked. You know, I mean, Ida B. Wells is somebody who is, her legacy is very inspiring to all of us. So that's how I got involved, and the rest is history. Yeah.
Judy, can you tell us a bit about the woman Ida B. Wells, just so some of our younger listeners have an opportunity to find out what she is all about?
Yes. So Ida B. Wells was a teacher, civil rights activist, journalist, and suffragist. She was born into slavery in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is a small town that borders with southern Tennessee near the Mississippi Delta. Holly Springs is about 40 miles from Memphis. And when Ida was 16 years old, She lost both of her parents and a younger sibling to yellow fever. That was an epidemic at the time. And so a couple of years later, when she was 16, that was like around 1878. And Ida was the oldest child in her family. And here she was, she had the responsibility of 5 other siblings to care for. Her grandmother lived in Memphis, and so she moved with some of her siblings. If you watch our trailer, you'll see there were some issues about breaking the family up, but Ida really fought to keep it together. They moved to Memphis to live with her grandmother. And then like a couple of years later, when she was 18, she took a teaching job in a small town about 10 miles outside of Memphis. And so she had to travel back and forth by train. In the meantime, Tennessee in 1883 passed the first Jim Crow law, which, you know, the Jim Crow laws were laws that separated blacks and whites in the South. And so this law made it mandatory for blacks and whites to travel in separate train cars. So one day when she was going to her job in this small town of Woodstock from Memphis, she was forced to leave what was called the ladies' car and forced to sit in the colored car. Well, you know, she refused. She got off the train. And what was interesting was she sued the railroad company and she won. She won the lawsuit. And from there, she was asked to contribute articles to newspapers from both Black and white publications. And then later, she co-owned a newspaper called the Memphis Free Speech with her partner and co-owner, J.L. Fleming. And so during that time, this was around 1892, she learned that 3 Black men, one of them who was a friend of hers, had been lynched in Memphis. And she wrote an editorial in her paper urging thousands of Black residents in Memphis to leave a city that would not grant them justice. And she published another editorial in response to another paper's claim that the recent lynchings that had taken place in Memphis and throughout the South had been caused by increased rapes of white women by Black men. Well, Ida challenged that. She challenged that charge, and she argued that these accusations of rape often followed the discovery of consensual relationships between white women and Black men. And she published this editorial, and it caused quite an uproar when it came out. She, at the time when the editorial came out, she was out of town. She was in New York City. And she had heard from several sources. First of all, white mobs attacked the office of the Memphis Free Speech. They gutted it. They destroyed the printing press. They pistol whipped the co-owner, and they threatened him that if he didn't get out of town, he would be lynched. And they threatened Ida with lynching as well if she came back to Memphis. As a matter of fact, it was found out that white mobs were planning to wait for her at the train station when she got off the train. And Black men said, well, we'll be there to ensure her protection. But she never came back to Memphis. And that's when she came to Chicago. And then while she was in Chicago, she got involved in the suffragist movement. She founded a club called the Alpha Suffrage Club that was about Black women having a voice in the suffrage movement, because the national suffrage movement wasn't acknowledging or paying attention to Black women.
Mm-hmm.
So she marched in the national suffrage march that they had in 1913 in Washington, D.C. She brought the suffrage club. They were part of the Illinois delegation. They get there and they are told that they are going to have to walk in the back of the march because there were some Southern suffragists that didn't feel comfortable. On our trailer, Michelle Duster, who is in our film, who is Ida's great-granddaughter, talks about what Ida did. Needless to say, she refused to walk in the back of the march.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let folks check out our trailer and you can find out what happened. But that's basically what she was all about.
Yeah, I mean, Judy, you have given us some rich history on a very significant figure, not just in African American history, but in American history.
Yes.
And there's so much to unpack here, and you're a perfect person to do it as an anthropologist. Just briefly, let's talk about the racial politics that were in play in Memphis during Ida B. Wells's era, when here you have white women having consensual sexual relationships with Black men. What year are we talking about, Judith? What year, what era?
We're talking about the Victorian era, the late 19th century, 1892, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm glad you brought that up because historically, this was also the time when Europe, right, was colonizing Africa, Latin America, different parts of the world. And, you know, white women were put on this pedestal.
Yeah.
We know historically that when white male colonizers, at first, when they started going to the colonies, they didn't even bring the white women, right? And some of them were having relationships with the colonized women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Concubines and everything else. And it wasn't until later that the European women joined them in the colonies. So this was a time when of white supremacy was being established throughout the world globally, right? And of course, we have to also talk about the racial violence. I do want to say colonization was a violent project.
Yes.
What is colonization? What does it mean to be colonized? It's dominance by brute force. So this was a violent project.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Our conversation with Dr. Judith Singleton continues after this. Code M Radio will be right back. You're listening to Code M Radio. Don't forget to visit codemmagazine.com for more information. Dr. Singleton, can you tell us about the event you have coming up to coincide with the statue?
Yes. So actually on Wednesday, August 26th, it is the centennial anniversary marking the passage of the 19th Amendment of women getting the right to vote. I do want to add a footnote to that. Black women did not obtain the right to vote until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965. But to commemorate the centennial, we are doing a fundraising challenge to raise money for our film. If you want more information, You can go to the Code M Facebook page, Twitter page, Instagram page. Our flyer is posted there. It will take you to our website. You can learn all about Ida B. Wells, who is doing the monument, designing and creating the monument. And you can see our trailer, and you can donate whatever you like to our GoFundMe page. We did create a special trailer to commemorate the centennial of suffrage. There are sections in the film when we talk about Ms. Wells as a suffragist. So we posted that, on our website to commemorate.
You know, Judy, this project is so timely for a number of reasons. One, we have just witnessed the tearing down of monuments to Confederate generals and figures, and that fight is still going on. We're in the midst of, as you mentioned, the centennial for the suffragettes movement. We also are witnessing the first African American and the first South Indian or South Asian woman being elected, being
Nominated.
being nominated as a viable candidate for VP.
Yes.
I don't think you could have picked a better time to do this project. How has the confluence of all of these things impacted your perspective on this work?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a time when we are seeing the intersection of race and gender come
Mm-hmm.
to the fore, and the issues surrounding that being acknowledged. And I think it's something that we are forced to confront and have conversations about it. Second of all, I think that the issue of the statues, one of the arguments our film is making is saying, you know what, hey, with the tearing down of statues, here we think Ida B. Wells is a wonderful replacement, right? Because her legacy, what she fought for, what she stood for, is something that our country was founded on, right? Freedom and justice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, we're trying to say that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a moment where we are, taking a look at these folks who have had these statues and looking at their legacy and questioning, is this who we are as a nation? Is this what we stand for? Statues are symbols of, people we consider to be heroes, symbols of the values that we have and honor. So this is quite a time. And we certainly think that Ida B. Wells and all that she achieved during her lifetime, there's no question that there should be a monument to her, and spreading the word about who she was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Singleton, let's talk about your journey from Chicago to South Africa to Waco, Texas. Just tell us how you got to be where you are right now.
Wow. Well, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I have to say something that Senator Kamala Harris said during the debate that truly spoke to me. I am a product of busing. I desegregated an all-white school when I was in middle school, like 7th grade, 12 years old. It was an incredibly positive experience. It changed my life. It helped me. Coming from the South Side, I lived in an all-Black neighborhood. I had 2 Black parents. I'm incredibly grateful for that, because I think going back and forth to this school in this all-white suburb, that I certainly knew my identity, right? And I could certainly see, immediately the difference. But it did change my life. It helped me want to see other worlds. You know what? One of the first Christmas presents I remember my parents gave me was a globe. I think that was something, that changed my life. I would look at that globe and it would make me wonder, right, what the rest of the world was like. What is it like to live on the other side of the equator? And I kind of think underlying that was sparking my interest in South Africa. Yeah, I had a career in radio, television, and film. In television production, I was quite young and witnessed certainly the racism and sexism in that. And I was 19 years old and didn't know how to handle it, and lived and worked in New York for a long time in the music business, which taught me a lot. And then later on, deciding that I wanted to go to graduate school and to commit my life to issues concerning human rights. And actually, it was in graduate school that I got my interest in South Africa and was able to go there 4 years after Nelson Mandela became president and lived there for 2 years. I did my field work for my dissertation there on sexual violence against women, and came back to Chicago. I have to say, I think I understood South Africa. It wasn't hard for me to understand South Africa because I was born and raised here in Chicago. That has its racial issues, that is very segregated. So that's basically been my journey. Yeah.
Judy, I had no idea that we had so many things in common. I knew we had Yale in common. I
Yes.
knew we were both multi-degreed African American women. I didn't realize the South Africa connection because I too have been there. What's your favorite city in South Africa? Did you get to travel at all?
Oh, yes. Oh God, when I lived there, traveled through the wine country.
Mm,
It's absolutely beautiful. That's the thing. South Africa is such a beautiful
yes.
country, but
Mm-hmm.
so socially apartheid, right?
Yeah.
Really messed it up
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the wine country and a friend of mine, we went to some of the smaller vineyards. I like Johannesburg. I lived in Johannesburg when I first went there, but then I ended up doing my field work in KwaZulu Natal. KwaZulu
Okay.
Natal
Mm-hmm.
is beautiful. And what's
Yes.
so interesting is that each province is different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
KwaZulu Natal is different than the Western Cape.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. But I also love KwaZulu Natal too.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about KwaZulu Natal, you're actually talking about Durban is a part of that region,
That's right.
correct?
That's
And
right.
I absolutely love Durban. It is a
Yes.
place where the Indian and is it the
Yes.
Atlantic Ocean
Ocean
meet?
meat.
And
Yes.
it's beautiful. It's a place where a ton of African American expats have gathered.
Yes.
It is highly multicultural. And as you said, apartheid completely destroyed the country. They are seeking to rebuild, but it is devastating when you see the level of poverty in
Yes.
South Africa.
And after living there and right, understanding, a developing nation, there's a very small middle class.
Hmm.
People are either rich or very poor.
Hmm.
And in South Africa, this is another thing that I want to say about the anxiety going on here in the United States. You know, Part of this anxiety is about our country is changing demographically, right? The demographic shift. We know by the year 2040, the United States is going to be majority, minority. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the economic and political power. So, you know, South Africa, even though South Africa is 85% Black and 13% white, whites own 90% of the wealth.
Yep.
So, you know, and so, right, I see the same thing, right, happening here. And I don't know, sad to say, I'm not sure. There was such hope for South Africa. And I don't know if it's really lived up to that, you know?
Well, let's hope that their current president can pull some things together. He is highly competent. His name is escaping me at the moment.
Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes.
I will tell you what's interesting. When I was living there, there was a show, South African based, called The Apprentice.
Oh.
Yes. And Cyril Ramaphosa was the host.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's more from Dr. Judy Singleton when Code M Radio returns. This segment is brought to you by Code M Magazine. Our guest today is Dr. Judith Singleton. We're talking about struggles. In your career, in your journey, what struggles have you encountered, once again, to get you to this point?
Ooh. Ooh. I don't know. Many struggles. I'm thinking, you know, particularly in graduate school. And I think a lot of students of color experience this, the struggle to be heard. It's not only the struggle to be heard, but the struggle also, because, you know, you're learning and you're in this learning environment. So part of it for me was also that struggle to a certain extent, have the confidence. It's not that I didn't speak in class, I did, but I think that confidence to say, hey, you know, this is my perspective. This is my point of view. I think one of the joys now is I do have that confidence. I kind of wish that I had more of it. Well, but I was learning and I was finding my voice, right? I think that's what it's all about. I was finding and searching for my voice. And I have found my voice, not to say that my voice does not continue to change, but I understand that and I'm aware of that and I realize that and I accept that. So for me, that was a struggle. A lot of students of color go through that. Yeah.
Judy, how much of that struggle do you think was related to, one, being a child of busing, and two, attending predominantly white academic institution?
Well, let me say this. By the time I went to graduate school, I was completely used to being the only one, or one of very few. That I didn't struggle with. Yeah, I think also I don't come from wealth, right? My parents were hardworking. Neither one of them had the opportunity to go to college. And I think I saw, right, undergrad and grad, you know, folks that had been groomed, right? Just because, and had been groomed from, if you want to say, childbirth, of things that I had to catch up to. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I think.
You know, that
Yeah.
is so much a part of the African American experience. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a mother who went to college. She went to North Carolina A&T, but that's not everybody's story.
Right.
And so that's the challenge. But you've also alluded to the economic challenge, right? Coming from families that we couldn't say we were middle class, we may have had middle class values,
Well,
right?
but I would say my parents grew into the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to join the middle class because of the policies from the New Deal and the
Yes.
Great Expansion, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, when they were growing up, they weren't part of the middle
Right.
class, but they were able to grow into it.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, that's my reality too. I had a father who worked at Chevrolet. I had a mother who was a
Yes,
licensed practical nurse, right?
yes,
But those kinds of beneficial policies have been rolled back.
absolutely.
So we've seen the elimination of those kinds of policies, and we've also seen young people and scholars, especially perennial scholars, take on loads of academic debt. And I think that's a major challenge faced by so many.
That is a huge challenge. I can't believe some of my students. I teach both undergrad and graduate students, but the amount of debt that undergraduate students take on. But there is a huge disparity with that, right? Those who go to what's known as the top schools, the universities have the endowments, right,
Mhm.
to cover them, and they are committed to graduating students debt free. But if you can't get into that top tier, then you're sacked with the debt, and that is an inequality that we must address. Absolutely.
You mentioned that you teach. You teach at Northwestern University and at Baylor University. Now, I'm not the most geographically inclined person, but those seem to be pretty far away from each other.
Yes, I teach online at Baylor in their public health department. And that's been interesting for me for a lot of reasons. I definitely identify as a northerner. I've never visited Texas. I wanted to kind of see, what what they're about, how they think, and it's been very interesting, and eye-opening in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Do you see a difference in the students, the ones from Northwestern Chicago from ones in Baylor in Texas?
Yes. you know I sad to say, class runs deep, and you know students at Northwestern tend to be um, from families with more resources. We know just with test scores, those that score higher on SATs and ACTs come from backgrounds with higher socioeconomic incomes, as opposed to Baylor, where there are more students who struggle with all kinds of things, family commitments, issues with, skill levels. It's a different kind of student. Yeah. I'm not saying they're less committed, but they have more challenges, right?
Judy, as someone who has taught both online and in-person class, clearly you have an appreciation for what educators are experiencing
Yeah.
today in the midst of
Yes.
the pandemic. And a
Yes.
lot of people don't know, and you tell me if you agree with this, but a lot of people don't know that teaching online is harder than teaching in person. Do
Yes,
you agree?
I agree. And I also think being a student and taking a class online is harder than in person, because you really, and with this program, it's all writing. So it's a great way to improve and sharpen your writing skills. But it's all writing.
Yeah. And so we're talking about older children. I saw a meme on Facebook of a little girl. She had to be like kindergarten, first grade, sitting in front of a screen, and you could just tell she was exacerbated. And so we need a lot of compassion in this season for our educators, our administrators, and our students.
Yes.
Do you have any advice or suggestion for those folks who are listening?
Well, I would say advocate for investing in education. As a country, we must invest in education. I don't know. It's once again speaking to what we value. And I don't know, sad to say, from what I have seen, I think if we don't invest, we're going to suffer. It's unbelievable to me how much we haven't invested, and we have to invest in the technology.
Yeah, you're talking to some folks who are situated in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
And we are the fourth least connected city in the nation.
My goodness.
And so clearly our students, our teachers are suffering. There are stories from all over the nation of dedicated students going and sitting in parking lots of restaurants and places with Wi-Fi just so they could do their homework. So I totally agree.
It's not right. It's not right. And yeah, this pandemic has opened the door into how much we have not invested.
How do we fix it? Let's have some suggestions on what should be done.
Well, first of all, we have to make it a priority. We have to make it a value. And we have to invest. We have to invest in our citizens. We have to invest in our people.
And let me add, we need to make demands of corporations. You know, one of the reasons Cleveland is the fourth least connected is because a particular corporation came to the city, and in laying the infrastructure for Wi-Fi, intentionally decided not to lay the infrastructure in Black and Brown communities. And so we have to put pressure on our elected officials, and elected officials in particular have to put pressure on corporations, and we have to do the same thing as consumers.
Yes, absolutely. And I, in connecting, putting the pressure on elected officials, voting, these were all things that Ida B. Wells wanted, right? And stood for. And that, if you don't like your elected officials, if you don't think they're doing a good job, you vote them out. But voting is important. And it is a way of, getting your voice heard, executing the power that you do have. We have to, and we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention, and we have to get our values together.
When we come back, we'll hear more from Dr. Judy Singleton on Code M Radio. Welcome back. For more information on Code M Magazine, visit the website, codemmagazine.com. Dr. Singleton, you have the sculpture going up. Do you audition different sculptors? Do they submit a piece of work? How did you choose this particular person?
So actually, Rana, Lori Little, who's also directing and producing, and we did not have anything to do with choosing the artist, Richard Hunt. That was done. So there were homes that were developed by the Chicago Housing Authority, the Ida B. Wells homes, and former residents from the Ida B. Wells homes, first of all, came up with the idea of having a monument dedicated to her legacy. And they chose Richard Hunt to design the sculpture and the memorial. And they went to Mr. Hunt and he accepted. And that's how the artist was chosen. Yes. And Richard Hunt is African American. He was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. He was born 4 years after Ida B. Wells died. So he has lived through a lot of stuff. And so I think it's going to be very exciting when the statue is finished and unveiled and everything. Yes.
Judy, say more about Ida B. Wells' connection to Chicago. Obviously, it became her adopted home.
Yes.
Obviously, she was well received. You've alluded to the distinctions between the North and the South, as you talked about Northwestern and Baylor. Say more about the distinction between her life in Chicago and her life in Memphis.
Wow. Well, that's a great question. Well, her life in Chicago, that's when she got into the suffragist movement and, you know, started the Alpha Suffrage Club specifically for Black women. You know, I think the connection, you know, Chicago has this connection to the South because of the Great Migration. And so, right, so many folks, including my father, came from the South to the North. So I think, so she had a connection there, right? Having come from the South herself and migrating to Chicago. So there's that connection, and really into the rights of women and getting into politics. She campaigned for many white women who were running for political office, and then she herself ran for state senator right before she died, like around 1930. And this is interesting. This was a time when Al Capone was very much alive and in Chicago. You know, he would sponsor candidates and fund them and back them. And apparently he would have his opponents killed off. But yeah, she did. She ran for state senator. I mean, you know, such a courageous person. And so she continued that activism right up here. And she was also speaking out about labor rights as well and writing about it here. Yeah.
As we get ready to close the show, Dr. Singleton, can you pass on some information to our listeners just about maybe how to get into your shoes, to get involved in things like this? What should people do to, first of all, carry on this legacy?
I think, and I tell this to my students and people who ask, choose one issue that you are very interested in and wanting to get involved. You know, let's face it, there is so much. Oh my God, there's so much that needs to be done. But choose one issue and find out, you know, in your local area, community, what organizations are involved with that issue and maybe contribute in that way. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose. You know, we're all very busy. People have families. People are trying to maintain, you know, their lives, raise their families, keep their jobs, blah, blah, blah. But if there's one issue, yeah, see how you can get involved in that. Yeah.
Dr. Judith Singleton, producer of The Light of Truth, a monument for Ida B. Wells. So we're living in interesting times, which is an Asian adage. And we're dealing with the pandemic, we're dealing with social unrest in this highly contested upcoming political season. Do you have any good words, any words of advice that you can leave our listeners with?
I would say, you know, in thinking about Ida and her legacy, Ida was someone who was looking for truth, you know, hence the title of our film, The Light of Truth. Find the truth. And we live in a time where truth is dismissed or truth is twisted. Yep. Truth may not always be what we want to hear. It can be inconvenient, but we must confront it in order to move forward. So we are at a time where, you know, there are some of us who want to dismiss truth, dismiss facts. You know, to me, that's the purpose of an education, to help you distinguish fact from fiction. And so we cannot just dismiss truth. And it's hard. It's hard. But we must in order to move forward and make a better society and a better nation for all of us. I would say also, too, moving forward, vote in the words of Mr. and Mrs. Obama last week at the convention. Make a plan on how you are going to vote, because people are already trying to spin and, you know, in terms of voting by mail. Find out, make your plan, and follow that plan.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Judith Singleton, I have learned things. I greatly appreciate having the time to speak to you. For Dr. Reverend Leah Lewis and myself, Daryl Scott, join us again next week for another edition of Code M Radio.